The Raiders may move on from some of their biggest stars. Head coach Josh McDaniels and general manager Dave Ziegler reportedly want their own guys. And now it seems like there may be a huge change on the offensive side of the ball. According to Adam Schefter, wide receiver Hunter Renfrow and tight end Darren Waller are on the trade block. And this is shocking because both of these guys were recently signed to huge contracts. And we also have Josh Jacobs, who's set to be a free agent, posting some cryptic messages on social media. It seems like Josh Jacobs might not be getting what he wants from the Raiders. Josh Jacobs last offseason had his 5th-year option declined, while Waller and Renfrow received contract extensions. But Waller and Renfrow's contract extensions are not what they appear to be. For instance, Darren Waller signed a 3-year, $55 million contract, and yes, if the Raiders did release him, he would be a fat dead cap hit, $8.9 million. But according to his contract, if he is traded before June 1st, he would only be a $660,000 dead cap hit, and the Raiders would save $11.3 million for trading Darren Waller. And we know that there was a report that Darren Waller was originally a part of that Davante Adams trade, and many believe he would have been traded if it was not for a technicality. Because Davante Adams was franchise tagged, you can't trade a franchise tagged player for a non-franchise tagged player, so that is why Darren Waller could not have been a part of the Packers deal. But what's even crazier is during the trade deadline, the Packers made another run at Darren Waller. Obviously, after the extension right there, it did not make financial sense for the Raiders, but the Packers are an obvious place that Darren Waller could go to if the Raiders do want to trade him. Hunter Renfrow's situation is a little trickier. He signed a 2-year, $32 million contract extension last offseason, and if the Raiders trade him before June 1st, they would eat $7.3 million in dead money. But if they do it after June 1st, they could spread it out over the next 2 years, and they'll eat $1.8 million this year and $5.5 million in dead cap hit in 2024, the year after. We know Derek Carr has a no trade clause, and he'll probably be released because he does not want to help the Raiders, especially after David Carr's comments. But if the Raiders threw in Hunter Renfrow, maybe that would make Derek Carr more inclined to say yes to a trade. Josh Jacobs, however, is a free agent, and he is projected to make about $12 million on the open market. And he has this tweet saying, "It gotta make sense for me." What does he mean here? What is he trying to say? He followed it up with a tweet saying it's more about life, but football too. So by saying that, he is admitting that it's about football and it's probably about his potential contract with the Raiders. And we saw Josh Jacobs put up historic numbers last season, and he definitely deserves a new contract because he literally was the best running back in the NFL. But the Raiders could still opt for a running back committee. We know they drafted Zamir White out of Georgia last season in the 4th round. And even though we expected a running back committee, Josh Jacobs ended up being the bell cow and actually had his most carries ever in a single season. But I think many of us are shocked to hear about Waller and Renfrow being on the trade block. And it's mainly because this current regime, head coach Josh McDaniels and general manager Dave Ziegler, decided to extend these guys. And we hear this report about them wanting to bring in their own guys, but they kind of already did this last season. In this past offseason, we quietly saw a huge turnover on the Raiders roster. 32 players were brought in by McDaniels and Ziegler of the 53 players on the roster. And most of this change was on the defensive side of the ball. And the Raiders elected to keep a lot of their same offensive players, even giving out a couple 1-year deals to offensive linemen like Jermaine Illuminor and Brandon Parker. And the contract extensions for Renfrow and Waller made sense. People see Renfrow as potentially the Julian Edelman or Waller as the Gronkowski in Josh McDaniels' offense. And the Raiders right now are the favorites to get Tom Brady, and it seems like these two players would make sense for what Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady would want to do, and you would think Brady would want the Raiders to keep these players so he would have more weapons. Unless someone like Brady brings in his own guys, his own tight end like Gronkowski, and maybe some of his own depth receivers around Davante Adams. And we know the Raiders have recently signed wide receiver Tyler Johnson, who had 36 receptions and 360 yards with Tom Brady in the Bucs in 2021, but I don't exactly think Tyler Johnson is going to lure Brady to Vegas more than Waller or Renfrow. It is also possible that the Raiders do land Aaron Rodgers. The Packers are open to trading him to an AFC team, and the team has to be a team that Rodgers would want to play for. And if they do get Rodgers, then moving on from Darren Waller Waller and Hunter Renfrow actually does make sense. Aaron Rodgers recently spoke about key locker room guys that he would like to keep playing with. Of the players he mentioned, 2 of them were wide receivers in Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb, and also 2 tight ends in Robert Tonyan and Marcedes Lewis. So moving on from Waller and Renfrow could set the groundwork for Aaron Rodgers to pretty much set up the Green Bay Packers offense in Las Vegas. But we do know Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler sold Mark Davis on a long-term plan. We heard general manager Dave Ziegler talk about this recently. And so maybe the Raiders are going full rebuild mode, and that is why they're open to not extending players like Josh Jacobs and also trading away players like Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. They could not end up signing Rodgers and not end up signing Tom Brady, perhaps draft a quarterback in 2023. The only players the Raiders are tied to long-term is Chandler Jones, Devontae Adams, and Max Crosby. These guys are pretty much locked in till 2025. And we've not thought about this, but it really is a possibility that the Raiders completely rebuild this roster with young talent and draft picks. And this would allow Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler to build their locker room from scratch, and it would kind of be the smartest decision if the Raiders do not appear like a contender right now, which they currently do not. Even if the Raiders did sign Aaron Rodgers, even if they did grab Tom Brady, they still have problems on the defensive side of the ball, big time problems on that side of the ball, and also an offensive line that does need improvement. Josh Jacobs, Hunter Renfrow, and Darren Waller are great players, but the only way the Raiders can justify continuing to pay them is if they know for a fact they could find a good supporting cast around them. So the Raiders are going to have to figure out if they could find that in free agency or the draft this year. We'll keep you up to date on what they're doing. The Raiders could also land a great quarterback in the draft, and they actually have scouted him already earlier this season. Make sure you check out this video right here where we have the full story on the Raiders and Anthony Richardson.